Thank you very much, Emma. So for some of you, it's the third time you hear me in a couple of weeks. So I hope you are not growing too tired of it. So we'll try to make the talk engaging. And so a different topic today. So this is work that has been led by Kenzo, my former PhD student, mainly, and then we had several wonderful collaborators as well that you can see here. So the question we start with here is a very simple question. Why are some people rich and others aren't? And what is interesting, we all have an answer to that. But it's quite interesting to see what people think about that, right? So, for example, this is what an American businessman who wrote a book about that thought about it. And basically, his view of the subject is that the rich have a different outlook on how to invest their money compared to the middle class. Of course, the poor don't have any money to invest, and they are, in a way, they have less scrappers. They are less likely to invest their own money. They will wait for others to invest first, whereas the middle class, according to him, is more likely to engage in his or her own money. And one of the reasons for this is that they may feel guilty if they don't invest their own money for projects they care about. So this is interesting because it's an explanation of differences in wealth, and there are many others. And why people and how people explain differences in wealth is obviously a very important question. It has effects on their well-being, on their outlook on life, and also, of course, on what they are willing to do about it. And I think the previous talk showed that, at least indirectly. So if we are very, I would say, in a very simplified way, you can make a distinction between two types of explanations of differences in wealth. One would be to make internal attribution for wealth inequalities, so basically to attribute wealth inequalities to internal disposition, properties of the poor and the rich that make them be where they are. And we know that these internal attribution have a host of consequences, or you can, a bit like we saw in the previous talk, you can make external structural explanations that account for these inequalities. And there's a lot of work on how people explain inequalities, how they explain why the poor are poor, and this has a host of consequences. For example, when people make internal attribution for inequalities, unsurprisingly, this is related to more negative stereotypes about the poor. It has impacts on members of disadvantaged group in terms of self-esteem, well-being, etc. And it leads to more acceptance of inequalities. And of course, external attributions have the opposite effect. So basically, internal attribution for inequalities, they are very threatening for members of disadvantaged groups, whereas external attribution, you could consider that they are in a way protective, because they are, the argument being that if we are where we are and it's a disadvantaged position, it's not our fault. It's due to structural changes or to the actions of an outgroup. So, of course, among all these internal attributions, there are ideologies that structure them, and the ones that we are most familiar with is certainly meritocracy. So the idea that in society, success is the reflections of one's personal merit. So I don't think I taught you a lot here. This is very widely held knowledge, I think. Where we tried to put maybe a new twist to it, to introduce a new aspect to this, is by considering the role that conspiracy theory may play in that story. So what are conspiracy theories? Well, you all know that, but let me take one definition that is one of the most widely accepted one. So conspiracy theory is the explanation of social events that center on the concealed and concerted actions of powerful, malevolent groups. So it's secret, and it involves a group that is scheming together for negative ends. So I want to highlight maybe two features of conspiracy theories that may be of interest here. One is that they involve powerful groups as target. Not always, actually. We have a paper showing that there are some downward conspiracy theories as well, but I think most of the literature has focused on conspiracy theories involving powerful odd groups. I don't know, does anyone know what this horse is? No? That's interesting. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Well, there was a recent paper in political psychology on conspiracy theory in Australasia, and that was one of the most popular. So I thought many of you would be familiar with it. So that's why I put it there. Okay. So, but apparently you are not representative of the Australian population. So this is the first feature. The second feature is, I like this quote, which I maybe mentioned. Beyond believing individual conspiracy theories, there is a whole debate surrounding the idea that there would be something more global called conspiracy mentality. And it's an idea that actually goes back to Karl Popper and then to Moscovici. And it's a general outlook on society, according to which whatever happens is the result of direct design by some powerful individuals and groups. And Roland Imhoff and his colleagues have elaborated a scale measuring this tendency, and it's used a lot now in the literature. So, and I'm going to refer to that as well. So the second, sorry for the typo here, a second feature of conspiracy theories that has been highlighted in the literature is the idea that conspiracy theories are more likely to be endorsed by the disadvantaged. So there is a I would say probably one of the most famous quotes by someone writing on the topic is conspiracy theories are for losers. So it means not only those who are objectively losing, but those who perceive themselves to be on the losing end of of society. And those people who perceive themselves under threat, so it can actually become very general, but it's a general tendency that has been found in the literature. So why is this the case? Well, of course, it's very tempting to argue that conspiracy theory tending to blame a powerful own group for all kinds of problems that we face, they can function like an external attribution and reflect the threats posed by potential internal attribution or one's social position. And this argument has been already written about, but it hasn't been actually directly tested, and that's what we really like to do in this set of studies. So, maybe the general idea that if we go beyond this very simple idea, is to think of conspiracy theories a bit like we think about collective memory. Conspiracy theories, we can do them as a narrative, or I should stay there, or people don't see that. I'm sorry. So you can view them as a narrative. It tells the story of how our group got where it got, right? It's part of, in a way, of collective memory. And they're also one of the, I think, important characteristic is that they go against the official, the accepted narrative. They are kind of a counter history. That's something that Moscovici writes about in this posthumous paper. And I think it's a really important notion. So it's not only that it explains why we are where we are, but it also offers a counter narrative to the official version and something that we can cling to, that can be also a source of bonds and can foster and maintain a collective identity. So what we did in the set of studies I'm going to present is actually test two very simple hypotheses. One, don't be too intimidated by the number of studies. I will try to be very, very synthetic. So in the first 5 studies, basically we test the idea that among members of disadvantaged groups, adopting this kind of conspiracy mindset will reduce the tendency to attribute inequalities internally to internal factors. And in the second part, and the idea is that this would work to decrease belief in meritocracy, right? And the second general, the other studies actually take the opposite perspective. Instead of seeing the effect of conspiracy mentality on internal attributions, we examine how exposures to internal attributions for disadvantage influence endorsement of conspiracy beliefs. Okay? So this, I would say, is the general model that I'm trying to test. And of course, I forgot to say, don't hesitate to interrupt if you don't follow something I'm saying. I know my accent is not always perfect. So this is the general model that I think I just explained in the first study, the 3 first studies. So we have conspiracy mentality as an IV, the attribution as the DV, and meritocracy beliefs in the middle. So in the first study, we could only focus on this aspect because it was actually a representative study that had been conducted in France, and we didn't have all the measures. So we have, in that study, we have measures of conspiracy mentality. We have also specific beliefs about inequalities, about economic and wealth inequalities. But something we have also, and that is, I think, quite interesting, is measures. We measured attitudes towards low and high status groups. So using feeling thermometers, people had to express their attitudes toward unemployed people, rich people, etc., etc. And so we made scales based on this. We also had measure of subjective socioeconomic status. And as we would expect, we find this idea that conspiracy mentality is associated with lower subjective socioeconomic status, which is consistent with what I said before. It's also negatively associated with meritocracy belief, as we would also anticipate. And I will walk you through this. What is also interesting is that it seems to be related also to attitudes towards high and low status groups, but it works. We have a direct effect only for conspiracy beliefs about inequalities, right? So these are related to attitudes towards high status groups, and to attitudes toward low status groups. But conspiracy mentality is not directly related to these attitudes. It's only related through meritocracy beliefs. So there is an indirect relation between conspiracy mentality and the attitudes. For conspiracy beliefs about inequalities, we have a full mediation. I hope it makes sense. So basically, that's what we find in this study. So in the next set of studies, we proceeded a bit like was done by Christopher in the previous talk. We actually thought, well, this is purely a correlational study. Let's try to manipulate conspiracy mentality. But that's not a very easy thing to do, right? So we relied again on a fictional setting by creating a fictitious society. And people had to put themselves in the shoes of a low status in-group in the context of a fictitious society. So this is what Kenzo devised. I think it's inspired by his love of video games. And so the fictitious society was called VLURVILLE, and so it's a large city. And what is of interest here is that there are two groups, one that is richer than the others. And so there is a description. It looks a bit like the fictitious society that Yolanda uses and her colleagues in your work. So what we did is that we tried to manipulate conspiracy mentality, and by using actually sentences that come from Roland and Martin scale. So the society is described either as characterized by a high conspiracy level. Those in power do whatever they want. There are secret organizations and political circles that greatly influence political decisions, etc. And in the low conspiracy mentality, while citizens are well informed about political decision-making process, etc., etc. So that's what we try to do. So people have to put themselves in the shoes of a member of the disadvantaged group. And then we measure most of the same variables, but in relation to this specific society. And so that's what we did in study 2, 3, and 4. I put 1 as well, using different groups. So one was a general sample, online sample. A second one was only unemployed people. And we replicate that. We did that in Belgium and in the UK. And generally, we tend to find the same patterns in these studies, that when we manipulate conspiracy mentality, we do find more negative attribution, less internal attribution for the in-group disadvantage, and for the all groups privilege as well. And this is, we also have a negative effect on meritocracy beliefs that predict, of course, as you would expect, internal attributions. That's the hypothesis, and what we find exactly is we find everything, but this direct effect here is not significant. So we only have this an indirect effect for conspiracy mentality, which is actually very similar to what we had in the first correlational study. So it seems that adopting a conspiracy viewpoint reduces internal attribution for inequalities, although the story is a bit more complicated. since we have a direct effect for attribution of wealth, but only an indirect effect for attribution of poverty. So I'm not going to discuss this here, but basically the idea is that adopting a conspiracy mentality would encourage the rejection of threatening attributions and the endorsement of protective ones. I would like to mention another study that we did to further substantiate this model, is study 5, in which we actually manipulate meritocracy directly. Of course, you all know these issues about only measuring the mediator rather than manipulating it, which makes, again, causal inference complicated. So in that study, we manipulate meritocracy by presenting the society as either functioning according to meritocratic principles or not. And as you would expect, it has a very strong effect on internal attribution. It's almost, I would say, a manipulation check. So I'm doing well on time now? Okay. So in the last set of studies, as I said, we reverse the arguments. Basically, we try to see what exposure to the internal and external attribution does to people, and especially to their view about conspiracy theories. So the argument, if these conspiracy values have such a protective function, well, when you are confronted with a threatening internal attribution, it might be more tempting, if you are a member of this disadvantaged group, to endorse or to be attracted to conspiracy values that may reflect this trend. And to do this, we used a paradigm that we thought was maybe similar to what many people experience when they are confronted with conspiracy theories, is using Facebook comments. We did that again with 3 groups, a general Facebook Belgian sample, only women, I think French-speaking women in study 7, and lockdown students in pain. So we exploited the pandemic situation in study 8. Sorry. So that's the first study with the general sample. We again used the VLURVILLE situation. So this is a fictitious situation. So we start with an inducement of inequality. So either we prime internal attribution or even meritocracy here, that in one condition for internal attribution of wealth. And in the second condition, we emphasize external attribution for this poverty that some people are in the country. And then people are confronted with a comment by a person who makes an argument about a conspiracy theory that would explain the current situation in blood. And we ask parties, I forgot to write the content of the conspiracy theory, I'm sorry. And we ask participants how likely they are to find this conspiracy theory credible, and also how much they are attracted to the person who expressed the conspiracy theory. So it's used in Facebook comments. That's what we did also in the study 7, this time using a realistic context. So here, I will walk you through this because it's in French. Here we use gender as the context and gender inequality. So we start with the argument that there is an inequality between women and men, making either an external attribution to this inequality. So basically, this is not due to women, this is due to the system, and we need to change the system and not women themselves, or an internal attribution, which is basically that women are responsible and should be more, should make more efforts, etc., etc. And so this appears on their screen, and they see comments below this post, which is a Facebook post. And one of the comments articulates a conspiracy theory. You are wrong, and that's always the same. The truth is that the inequality are not there by chance. It's a concerted project by those who are in power. I don't know how you say that in English, the masculinists, so the people who, patriarchy? Yeah, no, not patriarchy, like the pro-men advocates, the masculine men's right activists. Yeah, that's it. So they are everywhere, and they try to maintain these inequalities to better control women. So these are guilty. So this is a conspiracy by the males' rights activists. So what we as participants is how much they find this conspiracy theory credible, and what they think of the speaker, how much are they attracted to the speaker. So in terms of sympathy, agreement, and the beliefs in the conspiracy theory. And the last study used the exact same situation, but here we were really, in a way, somewhat lucky, because one of our students actually wrote a letter to the media during the pandemic, in which she complained about the plight of students who were locked down, whose mental health was really in a very bad shape due to the pandemic. So she expresses all her sadness about that. So, and so we did, so it is, as it was a student in the department that had received some media attention, we were also a bit concerned that some students might know her, so we controlled for that as well. But after presenting this situation, this letter, there was a comment by a member of parliament. So this is all manipulated. So we presented a comment by a member of parliament saying that the situation of students during the pandemic is very difficult. However, they do not respect the mandatory lockdown nor sanitary measure. If they cannot party and see each other, it's their own fault. So it's again attributing the mental health issues of the students to their own actions, which is something that a lot of people have done, because the young tended to be blamed for not respecting the measures. And another explanation was external. Again, it was, we have to change the rules, not blame the students. Below these comments by the member of parliament, there was a comment by another person, again, highlighting a conspiracy theory. And this is what it said. Mr. Representative, who are you kidding? This pandemic is beneficial to some powerful individuals. So you have heard all the conspiracy theories surrounding the pandemic. So this was somewhat representative of this. So what did we find? How did the presentation of this internal versus external attribution influence beliefs in the conspiracy theories that were articulated in these three studies? But there actually we got some consistent results, and they were consistent in being not significant. They have no effect on belief in conspiracy. But what we found, and I think actually it's always like that, when you don't get the results you want, you always think that the ones you all are really more interested by. So what we found is that they only have an effect on attraction force. So in the 3 studies, people found the speaker more attractive and had more sympathy for the speaker, but they didn't endorse the conspiracy theory more. And I think, or maybe people don't hear me if I go too far away. And maybe one explanation, or one way to view this is to suggest that conspiracy theories, they can be viewed not only as something that people believe in, but as a signal, as a social signal. Here is what by expressing a conspiracy theory, I'm also expressing membership in a group. And it's a way also to create social affiliation. And we have really seen that during the pandemic, where the main conspiracy believers were actually community builders. And so I think it's quite interesting that this kind of affiliation function of the expression of conspiracy theory seems to go hand in hand with the use of these internal attributions. So this is so yeah, we also have an effect on the measure of one of the questions was, I agree with the author of the comment. They tend to endorse it with more when there is an internal attribution, but if we directly ask them about the conspiracy itself, then we have no effect. So it's really an interesting question. Then I don't have a definitive answer to that, but why is it that there is an effect only on affiliation and not on belief? And maybe both are as important. So to conclude, it seems, based on this series of studies, that among the psychological benefits that conspiracy mentality in general and specific conspiracy belief may have, well, one is to deflect threats about explanations of one's social disadvantages. And of course, we focus on the disadvantage. We could also focus on the advantage, and that's something we tend not to do in conspiracy research because we are interested in conspiracy believers. But actually, those who reject conspiracy beliefs are also interesting, and it's really an intergroup phenomenon that needs to be treated as such. And it seems there that for the privileged group, we have the reversed mechanism with greater, of course, endorsement of internal attribution. And so I think we should consider this attributional aspect when if we think that it's a good idea to try to fight conspiracy beliefs. Not only fight the belief themselves, but the kind of function that fulfill for individuals. So I think I will stop at that because my time is running out.